going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day. We're going to be jumping into the 40k universe. We had done a reaction to a reaction video. Historian and armor expert reacts to Warhammer 40k Space Marine, stuff. And there was a part 2 video that we're going to jump in here to and do a reaction to. So yeah, this historian and armor expert reacts to Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2's multiplayer weapons and armor. This is on the GameSpot channel, so links will be down below as always, into the description for the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the original channel. So if you enjoy this video, click the link, give it a like, and if you enjoy the content on GameSpot, go hit that sub button on their channel. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. We'd love to have you guys come in here, join the discussions as we, do these live. And yeah, been around the channel for a while, decided to want to take your sport to the next level. Check those out and see if that would have any interest. But all that said, let's jump into this. So another reaction to a reactionception on some Warhammer 40k goodness.
Toby Capwell, historian, author, and expert on medieval and Renaissance arms and armor.
It was pretty good.
Today he's looking at some of the warfare of the Astartes and Heretics in Space Marine 2's multiplayer.
As usual, when you want to make something look evil, you have to make it look more exotic somehow. But all the joints and the way the plates are all put together, the proportions and shapes are a little different, but basically that's a perfectly functional armor.
There's not enough like pus tentacles coming off there for Nurgle,
where we broke down the lore, design, and historical references found within the Space Marine 2 campaign. But without further ado, it's over to Toby.
The Roman style's laid on pretty thick here.
Yeah,
it looks good.
Well,
though.
I mean,
I'm still amazed by how
that's the Ultramarines for you.
You can lay all that Roman stuff onto something that's very sci-fi fantasy. And Roman style is a tricky thing to get right, especially if you're trying to create the sense of one society, kind of imitating the Romans. On this Ultramarine, you've got some very overt Roman references. The horsehair crest on the helmet. Yeah. That was
the olive leaves, or the wreath of olives, whatever.
In the Roman army. You've also got, piled onto that in this case, the wreath of victory. Yeah. That's placed on the victorious general's head in a triumph, or the winner of a chariot race or something like that. Those wreaths, it's a sign of empire and imperial power. So it works right in with the story here. There's a lot of braid and stuff too, which is vaguely Roman, but also
even the Aquila looks
in the military,
Romanish, has a Roman feel,
generally to denote an officer class. The Space Marines carrying little boxes with bones in them. That's referring to the real veneration in medieval Christianity of reliquaries, where the bones, or otherwise the body
that have like body parts of saints, teeth,
people,
stuff like that.
Even the Virgin Mary and Jesus himself are placed in some incredibly ornate vessel and venerated. Venerations of body parts and blood and things is very much part of traditional Christianity.
Hey, what's up, Howard?
There was an industry of creating these things in the Middle Ages. Everybody has 10 fingers. Not St. James or St. George seems to have had hundreds of fingers, judging by the number of reliquaries that claim to have his finger in them. They've got the Roman stuff. And
definitely lots of fakes out there.
Christian belief and mysticism. Not all Christians believe this stuff. This is Roman Catholicism and a very particular part of it. This is what the Reformation was all about, when people decided they didn't believe all of that anymore. Maybe the Space Marines have forgotten about Martin Luther, I don't know.
Yeah, we got part 2 coming in.
In my talk,
that chain sword is beautiful.
I
want
deal a lot with a traditional weapons identity, something like a sword. Its identity as a utilitarian object and as an expressive work of art simultaneously. You have to think about them both. It's a weapon for cutting your enemies apart, but it's also a symbol of God's power, and gilded and engraved and blah, blah, blah. That's fine.
It's also a weapon of terror.
Industrial handmade weapons. It becomes much harder to do both of those things when it's patently mechanical when it's obviously something made
that looks pretty dope. The Chaos one right there.
And modern technology. Because that technological industrial.
It's pretty interesting, actually, how that looks. Like it's actually got almost kind of like an axe edge right here. So you could technically just use it for chopping. And then I don't know what this section would be called of the sword, but the under part of it here is, you know, a chain sword there to actually saw through. I don't know how much more practical that would, like, I feel like for a chain sword, you'd either want the actual chain to go all the way around, you know? Because I feel like having this, I feel like it's either you want an all or nothing thing with it. Because I feel like having this axe part right here would kind of interfere with the whole purpose of the chainsword, right? But then again, you're talking about Space Marines, and this is also like a Chaos Space Marine weapon. So you're talking about things that are far superiorly stronger than a normal human, and then if they're Chaos imbued as well, who knows what kind of things they could do with something like this. But I don't know. I just feel like it would be better to be an all or nothing thing, but it looks dope.
Technology, because that technological industrial aspect tends.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure someone probably makes replica chain swords that would be like, you know, real life ones. It would be pretty cool to have, you know, like if I you know, had the money to do it, I would definitely collect, you know, swords and other kind of medieval weaponry, just because I find them fascinating. Different types, you know, long swords, katanas, great swords, and some of these fantasy stuff like this would be cool. Like Guts Dragon Slayer sword would be one I would want a replica of. A chain sword, maybe a power sword from you know, 40k. You know, like maybe Sephiroth's Masamune and Cloud's Buster sword. Those would be cool to have replica swords, just to have, because I'm a nerd, you know what I'm saying?
To kind of cancel out the mystical or aesthetic or artistic power of something like a weapon. There are examples of like submachine guns being gold-plated and given ivory grips.
Oh, yeah.
And engraved, you know, given as diplomatic gifts.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of officers back in the day, you know, would have more ornate pistols and things like that. They weren't necessarily used practically, but they were definitely like a gift and a sign of station. You know what I mean? You know, having like pearl handled grips and maybe some gold inlay on a pistol or revolver or something like that with some kind of engraving on it. You know, they might not actually use it to hunt, you know, if they're like a bounty hunter, or you know, if they're an officer in war, they might not actually use it in wartime, but it would be, you know, potentially a status symbol or an award they might get.
And things like that. But it's usually quite a problematic thing to deal with. And with the weapons design in 40k, they are really wrestling.
Yeah, Dragon Slayer sword from Guts would be dope.
A way of having their high-tech motorized weaponry at the same time as they have this more primitive traditional quality. And it's really interesting when you try and play with that. You're advanced technologically, but you also in a society that's working in a very traditional, tribal sort of way almost. There's inherent contradictions there, because a tribal society is not big enough to allow for the kind of social specialization that industrial and advanced technology requires. So there's generally an advancement that the society has to make from a small group to a much larger one. It's kind of hard for me sometimes to believe in a very advanced technological society that's also quite primitive and tribal.
Oh shit, they actually got the straight up Night Lord stuff.
Fondness for the Night Lords. Initially I thought, you know, the gargoyle wings on the helmet is just a little too much. Getting to know them a little more, I sort of have a weird fondness for them.
If we're like comparing Space Marines to Knights, the Assault Marines almost feel like they're their own cavalry.
They drop right in where they're needed. That's the trick.
I mean, yeah, that is kind of the point of them, right? Is like they are supposed to be like the shock troops, the kind of cavalry that comes around from the flanks or whatever from above. Death reigns from above.
Of armored soldier or whatever you want to call them. You know, they have some very distinct strengths, but they have to be used right. And the medieval historical scholarship has kind of overemphasized or over-egged those points in history when armored knights on their horses have been overturned and defeated. Because in the modern mind, obsessed with class and class war, we like any story which shows the powerful, overmighty aristocracy being overthrown by common people. But they're like any weapon, you know, if you use them right, use heavy cavalry correctly, they're devastating. It's always the same in 40k.
I mean, you can say that about anything, right? Like if you use a certain unitype or archetype correctly in war, it's gonna be devastating, you know what I mean? Like, it's like saying if you shell someone properly with artillery, it's gonna work, you know, well. But if you miss, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of a Captain Obvious statement.
Okay, you've got a lot of different specializations. If you don't use them right, they will get killed.
This is the Vanguard.
Grimaldus. If these were red, we would straight up have Grimaldus in here. We would have Hell's Reach.
Class, who is more lightly armored. They have a grappling hook to be able to drive himself towards.
He's got the shark emblem.
Yeah, I mean they're analogous to light cavalry, light or medium cavalry in the 16th century, or light infantry. And again, it's the balance between speed and mobility and range versus punching power and the ability to take punishment. You can't have everything. It's all inversely proportional. And the classes that you see in 40k all have their equivalents in reality, certainly in medieval reality. That doesn't look totally unlike the standard.
That's straight up Rambo.
Combat.
That's straight up Rambo's knife right there from First Blood.
That knife, the so-called K-bar.
Yeah.
Where we see a pattern blade. There's a couple of different ways historically you achieve those patterns. It's either pattern welding, where you have different metals that are braided and forged together. And
well, I think there's ways to do that with like acid nowadays, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I could be completely mistaken, but I think getting this kind of design or whatever, I think you can like dip it in certain kinds of like acid, and it's called like acid etching. I could be thinking about something completely different though.
Different metals that are braided and forged together, and that's what creates the pattern if you know what you're doing. Or there's the use of homogeneous crucible steel that can be forged.
Yeah, you can do it without acid. Yeah,
if you then etch it with
there's
acid.
I mean, yeah. See, I think he's just what he's talking about right there with the acid. I mean, they a lot of these patterns are seen on older katanas in Japan, and you know they didn't use acid at all. So
that can be forged to form these patterns if you then etch it with the light acid. Two completely different techniques that are often mistaken or confused with each other. I'm not so sure whether the Space Marines are pattern welding or using crucible steel here, but it's cool. I mean, it's very useful for something like this because
I thought it was called Damascus steel, but that, I mean, like they could be just different names for the same thing or something similar. I mean, maybe Damascus steel is even something that like might be on that. I don't know. From what I understand from various documentary things that I've seen, like Damascus steel was throughout history one of the like greatest things that people sought after in Europe for swords, and they don't really know exactly how it was made, and it might have been a trade secret through a certain family of blacksmiths that got lost to time at some point, you know, something along those lines. So what he's talking about with crucible steel, either it's the same thing or it's just a forging technique, but Damascus steel might have something else in it. I don't know. I'm that's something I'll have to look up, or you guys can let me know in the comments for those who are more educated in the subject than I am.
Pattern. It's an immediate visual clue.
Yeah.
It's visual evidence that you are dealing with
Damascus steel is definitely in for something like that. Not sure if it's exactly the same thing. Yeah.
If the steel is good or the forging is good or both. You can't get a watered pattern on a crap blade that's made out of crap metal.
Because you can customize all of the colors of your Space Marines in multiplayer, I decided to go with the 30k World Eaters.
The World Eaters, yep. Instantly recognizable. Bad guys wear white.
I
think they like the white because you can see all the gore on them all the more readily. There is actually a 15th century treatise that talks about how you should set your armor up and how you should wear it.
Yeah, there's I want to say again that I saw some kind of documentary about some kind of Viking tomb or something like that was unearthed, and in it was you know, a Damascus steel sword that was basically pristine as the day it was made, kind of a situation. Still sharp, could still cut perfectly. I don't think it was rusted at all. At least the blade wasn't. I think the handle might have, I think it was a situation where they would have had to have put a new hilt and pommel on it, but the blade itself was still pristine. Something along those lines. So yeah, there's something like real Damascus steel. I believe there is something special about it that they are not sure how it actually was really created. And again, I think it's thought to be that some kind of blacksmith in the past, and maybe a line of blacksmiths, had some kind of secret technique that potentially, you know, got lost to time when that secret, you know, was lost.
And how the undergarments should be made. And they say very specifically in that your undergarments should be red, ideally, so that if you're bleeding, your opponent can't see the blood. They want to obscure any blood coming from you anyway. So it, you know, blood being visible on the body has been considered. I don't know what the medieval attitude is to the gore of other people being on you, but that seems to be what the world eaters care about.
The next class is the shield wielding bulwark.
Right, on the Black Templar.
Tank boys.
Enough. Again, an overtly medieval reference, although they're using Maltese crosses there, which is a different military order. But again, in 40k, you can forgive them almost anything. Well, it's interesting, you know, that you get different chapters. A number of chapters refer, you know, directly to medieval knights, and yet they do it in different ways. I mean, the Dark Angels and the Black Templars are both referring to Middle Ages very directly, and yet they come off very differently.
Is there historical precedent for knights wearing robes like this?
Sure, absolutely. Knights loved wearing clothes over their armor. It's an endless variation of the kind of specific statements that you're making. Knights started wearing surcoats, gowns over their armor around the time of the First Crusade and between.
Well, and I mean, I think also practically, right, like there's a lot of places in Europe where it's cold. So, I mean, you want to have as many layers on as you can, right? So I think practically even wearing clothing over your armor it's just practical, you know, to help insulate. But I think it also, there's, I'm sure, a layer of like hiding the fact that you might be armored, you know what I mean? Like making yourself look like a normal person, you know, at first glance kind of a situation.
between the First and Second Crusades. And that's one of these old stories that might actually have some truth to it, that taking their armor into a very hot, sunny environment and feeling that stuff heat up.
Wannabe posers.
Desperate for ways to keep the sun off of your armor. I'm trying to think of an example where a knight wears a cowl or a hood.
Well, I mean, the thing is, too, is, you know, the Dark Angels, they got their Primarch back.
In a Lithuanian,
know what I'm saying? Templars don't. Dorn's nowhere to be found.
Cover that's worn over
at least at the moment.
Helmet. It's like a tea cozy for the helmet, basically. Quilted, padded cover for the helmet, which is trying to keep it warm in a cold environment.
Right.
You know, armor is
just what I was saying.
In extremes of temperature, either hot environments or cold environments, it's hard to wear armor.
Well, and it's the same thing, like, it would be different for them, not necessarily, but like, there's oftentimes where swords get stuck in their scabbards because it ices over and you can't get them out, kind of a situation.
In each of those. I think the Dark Angel is wearing his cloak or whatever this is for expressive and ritual purposes rather than anything practical. It's nice to see the variety that they're giving you. Like they've got a couple like richer grips, like an ivory grip with gold bands on them, or more like the simple K-bar type grip there. And all these different blade types, again, they just sort of sit well with each other and next to each other. You have, you know, more generally medieval type sword blade profiles, and then other ones are, you've got those angular.
I mean, this looks very like Roman. I forget what the like name of their short sword or broadsword historically was called, but this looks kind of like a Roman short sword.
Gladius. Somehow it all looks like it belongs together. As usual, when you want to make something look evil, you have to make it look more exotic somehow. The associations that people have between these things are often very precise. It's interesting. When do you have to invoke those associations and when do you have to move away from them? But all the joints and the way the plates are all put together, you know, the proportions and shapes are a little different, but basically that's a, you know, perfectly functional armor. And again, it's nice to see them making that work in a sci-fi fantasy environment. I remember a number of years ago, I spoke to one of the craftsmen who made was involved in the manufacturing of the original polystyrene armor for the 1977 Stormtroopers in the original Star Wars. I asked him about the design of the armor of a Star Wars Stormtrooper is fantastically impractical in all kinds of ways. And it bears no resemblance really to how you would build any real functional armor. It just doesn't.
I couldn't tell you the difference between them either.
Body. And I asked him about that. And he said, no, that was purposeful because they didn't want it to look anything like a medieval knight. They wanted full armor that said something totally different. So they had to consciously move away from mechanical practicality. That was purposeful. So it's nice to see again that you can move back the other way and make it look like it'll work and still tell the story you want to tell. Most of what I know is really the Horus Heresy stuff rather than the most up-to-date 40k. I'm aware of the Death Guard's earlier history, and some author somewhere had an absolute stroke of genius when he took, you know, a member of the Death Guard, one of the traitor legions, right? And he becomes the founder of the Grey Knights. That's such an amazing turnaround, that he's one of the only Death Guard that doesn't betray the Emperor. And it's like you have to take him from the worst kind of traitorous depravity to get the greatest kind of knightly ideal somehow. Again, it's a wonderfully playful with the extremes of this. Of course, later the Death Guard become like the most disgusting and awful thing you could imagine. I know there are lots of people that like them, and that's fine. I can't imagine spending.
They would be one of the Chaos factions I would play in the tabletop. Thousand Sons, Death Guard. There's another one. I'm trying to think of who it would be. But Thousand Sons and Death Guard were definitely two of the Chaos factions, two of the Chaos Space Marine factions that I'd play on tabletop.
Spending hours and hours and hours painting, decaying flesh and intestines and things.
This is the sniper class.
Yep, camo and everything. People often think that it would be impossible to sneak up on anybody in armor. They hear how noisy armor can be.
See, I love the Alpha Legion. Like, I love the scales like this. That just looks dope to me, man. I think they have the coolest looking armor with this like dragon scale aesthetic.
And they think, oh, you wouldn't sneak up on anybody, would you? But you actually can. First of all, a lot of armor can be made to be quiet if you put your mind to it. Well, and also, again, if you're wearing, sorry, I just hit my mic again. If you're wearing clothing over the armor that's tight enough, it can prevent a lot of it from moving and creaking and making as much noise. Large scale live war games that we've done in Germany and things, we've found that even quite large squadrons of cavalry can use the landscape to mask their presence. And they can be like 100 feet away from you and you won't know they're there. If they're on the other side of a rise and the land is masking the noise or there's wind.
Well, and I mean, the thing is too, like, once you've gotten used to wearing armor enough and it kind of becomes more second nature, you're just used to that extra weight and moving around in it, it's not as difficult to move quietly as people probably think. Like, obviously, if you're not used to wearing an extra however much weight it's going to take for you to wear, chainmail, ring mail, or if you're in full plate, yeah, it's going to be difficult and awkward, to do that when you first are getting, used to it. But we adapt. People adapt. You get used to that stuff.
Masking the noise, you can actually be really stealthy, even with large numbers of armored men, if you know what you're doing.
On the scope, we did an episode of Firearms Expert Reacts with Space Marine 2 with Jonathan Ferguson, and we discovered that the Latin around the edge of the scope says, "Death to me is art."
Well, they take their, the motivational aspects of this very seriously, don't they? I really like the Iron Warriors, actually. Again, they don't seem very likable, but like their Primarch, Perturabo, is a much more nuanced and interesting character than you might have thought, with a lot of Renaissance.
Poor Perturabo, man.
He's very much conceived as a kind of Renaissance nobleman who's interested in architecture and sculpture and things like that.
The story between him and Fulgrim actually is pretty sad.
That not your bargain bin baddies at all. This again, this design variation from more mobile and less heavily armed right through to very heavily armored and perhaps less mobile. When you're fighting in historical equipment, you have to make those choices for yourself too, depending on how you're fighting, what the environment is. If you pick German, Italian, English, French, all of these different styles.
Man, it's a national treasure.
They have all their own choices about the relationship between protection and mobility, and how much of one and how much of the other do you have in your equipment. And they might seem like quite subtle visual differences, but little changes to the equipment. You make that a little bit heavier, you make that a little bit bigger or more inflexible. It has a massive, massive effect on the human experience of wearing the armor.
Advancing towards objective.
I really hope this game is popular and successful, because it would really prove some core principles.
It's exceeded pretty much everyone's expectations for what Space Marine game could be.
Historical authenticity, or at least faithfulness.
I need to play some of the multiplayer. I still really haven't played the multiplayer stuff that much at all.
Those things are really important to me, and they don't seem like they're always popular in modern media, or not always important. And I'd like to think that those principles could also, they could also be the factors that lead to commercial and artistic success. I think you can be successful and have some deeper values you know, if this game is successful, it would be a good lesson for everybody, I think.
Thank you so much for watching. Remember to comment below other games you'd like to see on the show, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this and beyond.
All right, well, there we have it. I mean, obviously, the man knows his stuff. He clearly knows his 40k lore, his factions. So it's cool to see someone that is, you know, obviously an expert in both real life historical weapons, armaments and whatnot, and, you know, potentially how they are used, and also someone who is knowledgeable with the 40k universe and the different factions and what the symbolism and significance of a lot of the different things means, you know, the symbolism, and like he was talking about with the relics and the Roman historical references with the olive wreaths and the horse crests, and again, like I said, the you know, even the Aquila looks, you know, has a very Roman feel to it, you know, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, pretty cool to see. And I mean, for what he was going off at the end there, obviously the game has been a massive success. I think it's pretty clear that we're gonna get a Space Marine 2 game, maybe even because of how successful it's been. I've read some things that they might even extend some more of the DLC, and they might add more story-based DLC, like all of the stuff they've been planning on so far has just been like free content with some like aesthetic DLC packs, you know, that you can buy if you wanted to, but actual what are they called, the co-op missions, I forget, I can't think of what they're called them or whatever, but the operations, I believe, you know, all of those, that's all like free content. They're not charging for any of that. But I've heard and read some things that there might be some talks behind the scenes of them actually adding some more extra like story-based stuff into the game. You know, who knows? We'll see if that happens or not. Either way, I'd be down. You know, the game's a great game. If they want to add some more story DLC to it, that's paid, hey, you know, I'd support them. I think, you know, I think it's definitely worth it. But I also really hope that because of the success of this game, we start to see more, I mean, there's already plenty of 40k games out, but just more of them and of different genres, right? Like, I mean, I know Rogue Trader's out, which is a game I want to get into and play at some point in time. I just have such a long list of games that I want to get through, that I need to catch up on. But I do want to do that. There's Battlefleet Gothic 1 and 2. I have both of those that I still need to play through. Dawn of War 3, I would love to see, you know, another Dawn of War game. That'd be dope. I've heard that supposedly it has been confirmed. I haven't actually like seen any articles, but I've heard videos of people saying that it's been confirmed that Creative Assembly is actually actively working on a 40k Total War game. If that is the case, that could be really fucking sick, because I love Total War Warhammer, and for them to take it to the 40k universe would be really fucking cool if they could do it right. One of the big things they would have to do, though, is they would have to get naval combat back in there and do it right, because the ship-to-ship space combat is a big part of the 40k, you know, universe. So that's something they need to add in there. Then I was pretty disappointed that we didn't get that in Total War Warhammer. Yeah, hopefully we can see, you know, some more 40k games, you know, like Bolt Gun. Bolt Gun was a great, you know, first person kind of retro aesthetic, you know, Doom game. Basically, it was basically Doom in a retro style like the OG Doom was, but in the 40k universe. So I just love to see more games in the 40k universe. Maybe even games from other factions' perspectives, you know, maybe get a game where we play as a Necron or as an Eldari or something like that, doing other things, you know, who knows. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and a subs. It helps me and the channel grow. Links are down below in the description, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the GameSpot channel. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video as we go through it, go over there, click that link, give it a like, and if you enjoyed the content on the GameSpot channel, give them a sub. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, you know, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. We'd love to have you guys come in here and join our discussions as we discuss the videos that we're going over. So yeah, if you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your sport to the next level, check that out. But thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have yourselves a wonderful day. We'll see you on the next one.